All right, for those of you who have been listening to my lectures, congratulations, you've made it to the last one. So let's get through this. This is the end of World War II, the last section. All right, so today in this lecture, we're going to turn towards Europe. We just finished talking about the Pacific. So this kind of shows an overview of all the fighting that took place in the European theater. So I just want to give a quick rundown of everything that happened so you'll have a better understanding as we move forward. First off, I want you to look at all the territory that is not acquired or controlled by the Axis powers. And we've talked about this before. So you've got Spain, and Portugal, but Spain was under Francisco Franco, a different fascist leader. And then you've got down here, Turkey was actually fighting with us. The British and the French controlled the Mid-East there. Sweden was neutral, and that was respected, as was Ireland. Ireland doesn't like to get involved with fighting as long as the British are involved. So anyway, you had in the north, you had the Germans and or in North Africa, you had the Germans and the Italians, right? They were up there around Tripoli and Libya. Montgomery, a British general, pushes them this way. They're defeated at Al Alamein. We are pushing this way once we get involved in 1942. And that's General Patton. Eventually, the Germans are forced, and the Italians, forced to retreat out of Africa. A lot of fighting is going to take place here at Sicily. Then they're poised to come in here on the Rome offensive, and there's some tough fighting here at Monte Cassino, right? But then they're going to Rome. And at that point, pretty much then the Italians, they surrender because they didn't want to be a part of this anyway. So then there's a movement of forces that are going to come this way, but it's going to be coordinated with the D-Day invasion that comes here at Normandy. The Germans are turned away from here at Stalingrad, and they're being pushed back by the Soviets. So the Soviets are pushing them back here in all directions, and then the British and the Americans and the Canadians are pushing from this direction. We are also bombing various military targets in Germany. Eventually, it's going to force them to surrender. It's going to take a while to do that, though. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is the Battle of Stalingrad. It was one of the worst battles of the war in that you had like millions of combatants, 2 million troops fought against one another, and there were about 2 million people killed, right? Thousands and thousands of Russian civilians were killed as a result of this battle. The worst of it was the winter of 1942-43. People were starving to death. They had to eat leather, anything they could get their hands on, right? So it was a horrible one. But the Russians were victorious. They pretty much annihilated the German Sixth Army, and Hitler's hopes of sustaining a two-front conflict were dashed at that point, right? And so the Soviets start to push them this way, and then once the Americans come across the English Channel with the British and the Canadians, then we start to push them towards Berlin as well. All right, so it starts in Africa, right? At least for the British and the Americans. So this guy up here in the top, this is Bernard Montgomery. He is a famous or a very good British general. And the guy at the bottom is known as the Desert Fox. His name is Erwin Rommel, and he's a very famous German general. So anyway, he helps the Italian soldiers maintain control there until at El Alamein. Then what happens is they are defeated. Germany eventually is forced to withdraw out of Africa after being defeated by Montgomery and Patton's troops, and then they go up to Sicily. Interesting thing about Erwin Rommel, after his finished with his command here in North Africa, then he goes to the north of France to defend against an imminent invasion by England and the United States. While there, he learns of an assassination attempt against Hitler. He wasn't part of it, but he knew of it and he didn't say anything or do anything. And so for that, he was either going to be put on trial or he had to commit suicide. He chose suicide with cyanide. Out of all the people, I mean, there were about 4,000 people who were killed as a result of that attempt on Hitler's life that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, so then the fighting goes up here towards Italy, and you can see first it's Sicily. So they're pushed out of Tunisia here. You can see where a lot of the troops are kind of coming in and pushing them back. It goes into Sicily, and then from Sicily, it's going to come up into this location here. Big fighting takes place there at Monte Cassino as they push forward. Right. So anyway, that's the Italian campaign, Operation Torch. That's supposed to be the soft underbelly of Europe there as they continue to push forward to take out all the Axis powers. But as I said, first they had to go to Sicily. This is General George S. Patton. He's a graduate of West Point. He was the GOAT. He was the lowest in his class, but he's a brilliant general. But anyway, he's the one that oversaw U.S. troops fighting in North Africa and then in Italy. It took them 38 days of fighting, right, to successfully drive the Germans and the Italians from Italy into from Sicily into mainland Italy. So then the fighting takes place, and this is just heartbreaking, right? Because this is an old abbey, so old it was built in like the 6th century, 529, right? It was a Benedictine abbey for monks that were there, and it was completely destroyed. Americans bombed it after intelligence that they got from the British that the Germans were being holed up in there. The only people that were there when it was bombed were about 200 Italian people taking refuge. Apparently, we had sent all these flyers trying to tell the Italian people, hey, clear this out of any remnants or artifacts that you can, because we're going to have to take this because the Germans are using it as a strategic point. Turns out the Germans didn't start using it as a strategic point until after it was destroyed, because the person who was in command of the German troops had a real respect for the history of Europe. The bottom image, though, is the abbey after it was rebuilt. So it's not a very old abbey, even though it really looks like one. But anyway, that was something that they had to, it was part of a defensive line that the Germans and the Italians have to try to halt any Allied advance from going any further into Europe. Eventually, it was broken, and the Allies were able to go in and liberate Italy. And if you look at the people lining the street there, they are very, very happy. The Italians were thrilled, and for them that meant that the war was over. So this was June 5th, 1944, and you may know what happens on June 6th, 1944, and if you're saying D-Day, you are right. So they're coming in from Italy, and then they're going to come down from England and then push, the Germans start to push them east once they get there. All right, so this is the planned invasion of Normandy. So right here, this is General Dwight Eisenhower. He too is a graduate of West Point. He was not the GOAT, the bottom of the class. He was kind of towards the middle of his class. But anyway, what he's doing is he's briefing these guys here. You can see the patch on their shoulder. It's a Screaming Eagle. That is the 101st Airborne Division. And these guys are being briefed. They're going to be dropped by plane, paratroopers behind enemy lines. And so this is part of the planning for Operation Overlord, which is going to be the D-Day invasion. Okay, so here's the way it's working. You can see from various locations up here in England. Maybe you can't see because I cut off that part of the picture. But anyway, they're going to be coming down, the Americans, the British, and the Canadians, and they're all going to kind of rally in the central location and then do a forward thrust onto the beaches of Normandy. And the beaches get different names: Utah Beach, Sword, and everything else. They're given various names on that day as they move forward. It's a huge amphibious landing. Okay, but the element of surprise was very, very important. So there's this operation to thwart any attempt by the Germans to fortify Normandy, so that they can't defeat this amphibious landing. And so we have all like these fake tanks, fake airplanes, fake troops, maneuvers, trucks, everything. They're inflatable, and we move them around so that the German Luftwaffe, as they fly over, might see all this stuff. They're saying, oh, they're rallying over here, at Calais. So we want to divert them. We have these phantom field armies here and there and all this dummy equipment to convince them, yeah, we're going to invade at Calais, even though they were going to do at Normandy, which Rommel knew anyway. So he and Hitler differed on that. So here are some images from that landing on June 6, 1944. The one in the middle just shows the vastness of this. I mean, look at all of there's aircraft, there's ships, there's thousands and thousands of men as they come out onto the beaches. To the far left there, this is a landing craft. So these poor souls, they've got their rifles wrapped in plastic. I don't know how good that did them. I know that my M16, like 40 years later, when it got wet, it didn't handle very well. But you see too, so that's where the men come off, and then in the middle you can see all of these ships or all these trucks and everything else are offloaded, as are tanks, and then from there they're going to start to try to push the Germans back. They've also gotten quite a few German prisoners of war over here seated on the right. They're kind of keeping them silenced in one location. All right, from the beaches of Normandy in the north of France, then they're going to start to push. Well, actually, they push in all sorts of directions, but for the most part, push towards the German headquarters over there in. The first they go to Paris, and then from Paris they're going to push on into other locations. So they want to make sure that they can liberate Paris. It was pretty slow going. From what I understand, there's these big hedgerows in between fields that have been built up over many, many centuries, and even it was difficult for the tanks to go through those because they were just built up so high and so strong. You can see too, it's color coded. The green, that's the area controlled by the Allies in July of 44, so it takes a month, and then that's by July 25th. A week later, that blue area, a week later, kind of, or in August, it's going to take about maybe 2 weeks later. Additional area, and then by the end of August, they've got pretty much the north of France, and they are in Paris, right, where they can go there. So here on the right, it kind of talks about different things. They liberate Paris on August 25th, then they move toward German assault. And then there's the Battle of the Bulge. This is January. It ends January 16, 1945. And then there's the Yalta Conference, and this is all the big three, England, the United States, and Russia meeting at Yalta. And then the Soviets capture Berlin, and the Germans are going to sue for peace on May 7th, and we're going to get VE Day on May 8th. Okay, the writing's on the wall. A lot of Germans know what's going to happen, and so some of the people in the high command, generals, colonels, people up there, they want to get rid of Adolf Hitler, right? And then they just want to try to sue for peace. So there's this one guy, Klaus von Stauffenberg. He was a colonel in the German army, and he has a briefcase, and it's loaded with plastic explosives, and he takes it into this meeting room that they were all invited to go to at the Wolf's Lair, right? And so it's Hitler and all of his top generals, and von Stauffenberg leaves. He has a phone call to go take, and then somebody moves his briefcase. So his briefcase was at such a point, and I'm going to try to draw it. Here's Hitler right here. He's number one. He's not really number one, but number evil genius, right? Here's the briefcase right there. Somebody put it behind this very heavy leg on the table. When it explodes, that leg is in the way. It doesn't kill Hitler. It does kill 4 other people, and it injures Hitler. And then people find out that von Stauffenberg is involved, as are other people. And it goes back even to Rommel knows about it, and about 4,000 people are killed as a result of it. I want you to look at some of the people here. We've got Keitel, we've got Kuru. So these people at top, Kuru is going to be the one who surrenders to the Allies when it's all over. Okay, and then we get the liberation of Paris. This is August 25th, 1944. The Parisians are very happy, and there's a big celebration. The guy over here on the left, this is Charles de Gaulle. He had led the French freedom fighters and the French underground during the resistance during World War II. They're kind of marching down the Champs-Élysées, which is this broad, beautiful boulevard in Paris that kind of comes down, and it's right there at the Arc de Triomphe. The Arc of Triumph right there where 12 different streets come together. It's kind of a crazy, crazy circle. And then here, American troops are marching down the Champs-Élysées on the left, and you can see the Arc de Triomphe in the background. And again, American tanks come through that. So very cool. Same ones that the Germans had gone through 4 years before. So as the Allies advance in France, the people in various communities seek retribution against collaborators with the Germans, specifically female collaborators, women who had romantic or sexual relations with Germans while they were there. Some of them had German children, but anyway, what the people of France did to humiliate and to kind of teach a lesson to these people is these women is they would shave their heads and then just kick them out of town. So you get these bald women kind of wandering the countryside, sometimes with their children, and everybody knew, okay, this person had collaborated with the Nazis when they were here. All right, so the Germans, what they do is they mount another offensive. This is known as the Battle of the Bulge because they broke through the lines there that the Allies were pushing on them. And this is in a location very near where they had lost World War I, right? So this is near the Ardennes, Argonne Forest and places like that. So this is the Battle of the Bulge. Right here, and the worst of the fighting, well, it happened between December and January, so December 1944, January 1945, and it would have been awful, very, very cold winter. All right, so as they do that, the Americans and British and Canadians keep pushing east, kind of moving this direction, while the Soviets are moving in this direction. They're both trying to get to Berlin, right? But the Soviets win. They meet up. They get to Berlin first at Hitler's bunker. Hitler had already committed suicide, but our troops met up with the Russian troops at the Elbe River. And you can see where the Elbe is. It's on the western side of Berlin. So they made it to Berlin and kept moving westward. And then we made it to the Elbe where we met them. And so that's why after the war, they're going to end up occupying that portion of Germany. Okay, so in February of 1945, after the Battle of the Bulge and before the Germans had surrendered, FDR and Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin meet, the big three meet at Yalta, and they talk about what they're going to do. There had been another meeting as well. There was one in Tehran, and there's going to be one at Potsdam. So here they talk about what a post-World War II is going to look like, right? And they're also discussing the war. FDR wants the Soviets to come in and aid in fighting the Japanese in the Pacific, which they do just a couple of weeks before the war ends, right? So he wants that. Churchill, he wants there to be a strong Germany so that it can be a buffer against an advancing Soviet Union. So he kind of knew what was going to be happening at that time. So anyway, so FDR and Churchill concede that Stalin, though, needs a buffer between him and Germany. He doesn't want this to happen any longer, so he wants a weak Germany. Right? FDR is kind of like Woodrow Wilson in that he's like, we need a new world order. So he wants the United Nations. All right, so Italy falls, at least the fascist government of Benito Mussolini does. He and his mistress, Clara Petacci, are killed. They're hung upside down, and then people stone them, throw tomatoes at them. So that kind of gives you a sense of what the Italian people thought about fascism at the end of the battle there. And then here, this is one of my favorite pictures. So this is an American and a Russian. This is where they meet up at the Elba River. And apparently they had vodka and our guys had cigarettes and they kind of celebrated by being unhealthy, drinking and smoking. So as the Allies advanced, they come across these concentration camps. We had known, our leadership had known that this was going on. They just didn't know to what extent. And I think that they were ill prepared to deal with it when they found what they did, right? So anyway, if you look at that, these are the camps that are there. The one that is the oldest is number 6. That's Dachau. It's not far from Munich. On here, yeah, it says Munich. The Germans call it München. But anyway, it was there, and that was for political prisoners. And so this is what it was meant for originally, for just political prisoners, people who disagreed with the Nazis or Adolf Hitler. And then it evolved, right? Now we're going to get rid of those less desirable in society, and we need to have work camps. So that was the main purpose of them. There's 3 main reasons. We're going to imprison our opponents, we're going to eliminate some people, and we're going to have forced labor. That was before the war. After the war started, then these camps really just started to build up very quickly, and you could see that in Eastern Europe they were there. People always hear the term, oh, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, but another at least 6 million were killed who were had mental disorders or who were homosexual or who were gypsies or who were just Slavic or who were just political prisoners. So millions of people outside of just Jews were killed in the Holocaust, right? So those roles expanded. This was all overseen by the SS, which was this elite group of Nazis. They were kind of the top of the top, the creme de la creme of Nazis, at least Nazi soldiers. Right, so the road to the Holocaust, and the video that you watch will be about this. But as I said, the first concentration camp was Dachau, and this was for political prisoners. And then they start moving on the Jews. There's a nationwide boycott against all Jewish businesses in April of 1933. Then the Jews were banned from holding any jobs in government or in universities. And then they lost their citizenship, not just Jews, but also gypsies, right? And then there was this law that said anybody who has some sort of disease or mental disorder or anything like that would be forcibly sterilized, right? So gypsies were, right? They were misfits. Black people were supposed to be too. It was a crime if you were homosexual. And then there were race laws. So there was no, if you were an Aryan, so German, you couldn't kiss, you couldn't have a relationship with somebody who was non-Aryan, specifically a Jew. And so there was this kind of like animosity and hatred and negative feeling towards the Jewish population that started, and then it became very, very popular. And then we get this nationwide movement of people. There's Kristallnacht, right? And it's just a nationwide attack against Jewish people. The Night of Broken Glass. This was in November of 1938. That's what Kristallnacht is. And then in 1940, what they start to do is move the Jews into what's known as the ghettos. So it'd be a certain location within a community, and they'd have to live there. Oftentimes, many families would share an apartment or a room, and somehow they had to get enough food. Oftentimes what they did is it was forced labor. They would go work in these factories making munitions or whatever they were supposed to do. And then eventually from these ghettos, they were moved to the concentration camps. All right, so many of the people, well, a lot of the people tried to leave. Some just thought, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. And so they just waited it out thinking that, oh, we're going to be all right. But this group of people in particular, these Jewish people boarded a boat, the St. Louis, right? There were 937 passengers on board, almost all of them Jewish. They sailed here to the United States. They were turned away here. They were turned away in Cuba. They didn't have the right visas. We also were not really accepting immigrants at that time because of our immigration laws. And then many of them were sent back. Their ship was to Europe, and about 25% of them, it's estimated, died in the Holocaust. All right, so this is what our people came across that they found as they went from concentration to camp to concentration camp. Sometimes there would just be bodies of dead. Sometimes there would be burnt out corpses and that sort of thing. Other times there would be people walking around that look like the living dead. And one of the first things that our soldiers wanted to do was feed them, but they had gone so long without food, their stomachs couldn't handle it, and some people died from that. Many people just died from the diseases that they were suffering from when we got there. But can you imagine how awful that would be to endure that for several years, and then just as they're being liberated, then die from a disease or die from, from eating, basically. So it was awful. Okay, here are a couple of images. The one on the left, this is Auschwitz. This was one of the most notorious camps in the whole system. On there, the sign too, it says Arbeit macht frei, which is work will make you free. And then over on the right, these are ovens where they burnt all the bodies. What they started to do originally is they did these mass graves, and they would have people line up or go into them, and then they would just shoot people and then bury them, sometimes bury them alive. But the German soldiers couldn't handle that. Psychologically, that was too much to bear. And so they had to come up with a more efficient way of killing. And so that is why they started putting people into the showers, killing them with gas. So they just had to round them up into the showers and then turn on the gas. And then they would make the workers, also Jewish, clear out the bodies and burn the bodies. And then their hands were clean. They didn't have to see it. They didn't have to suffer from the psychological devastation of knowing that they had put hundreds of people to death. All right, here is one famous individual. I think that you've all read Night, Elie Wiesel's Night. This is Elie Wiesel right here at Buchenwald. People might wonder, well, how do we know that that's him? Probably he saw all the pictures from the Holocaust. There aren't that many, right? And said, oh, there I am. And then, oh, I know this person, I know that person. And you can see, look how thin, they're emaciated. They didn't get much food at all. And then there'd be mass graves, such as this one at Bergen-Belsen. Here are some images. This is at Dachau of what our guys saw. Here, Dachau prisoners wave an American flag and they cheer their liberators. That's on the left. Right, they're up on the roof. And then here, this is at the crematorium at Dachau. This is what they found when they went in there. I think I've told you I had the opportunity to go to Dachau. There's only one thing standing that was there at the time, and those are the ovens. They also have one barracks, but the barracks is actually a recreated one. All the other ones were torn down. There's a museum there. You can go in and you can tour. They have some artifacts and other things there. But to visit that, I have to say that that was a very moving experience to go to a concentration camp. All right, so Hitler had some secret weapons. We call them secret weapons. They were in a rush to develop these weapons, and that is why we were in a rush to develop nuclear weapons. So here we had the V1 and V2 rockets. The V was for vengeance. Right, so these were rockets that were able to go long distances, right, to deliver a blast, to deliver a bomb, and they weren't manned crafts, they were missiles basically, right? So the V1, the Allies called them buzz bombers. The V2, this one was long range, which was about 200 miles. The guy right here, this image, this is Dr. Werner von Braun. Who he developed a lot of this weaponry for the Germans and then later came to the United States and was part of our aerospace program. All right, so as we are advancing, Hitler commits suicide. Hitler had created this huge underground city in Berlin with layers and layers of rebar so that they would be, bomb-proof. He was even in the works of trying to create a whole big underground interstate system. So he's 55 feet below the ground, below what they call it, the chancellery, and a whole suite of rooms. There are 18 different rooms, water, electricity, everything that he needed. He had for many years had a mistress. Her name was Eva Braun. He married her, I think, the night before they get together. I think they had dinner with Joseph Goebbels and his wife, and then Hitler and Eva, along with their two dogs, commit suicide. But he took a cyanide pill and then he shot himself in the head. And for many years, there's always been speculation what happened to Hitler, but of late, it seems that he killed himself before the Soviets got there. And so the Germans quickly they cremated him and burned him, but his body wasn't completely gone because somehow they kept his teeth so they could test for like the cyanide or whatever. But anyway, they didn't want there to be a martyr for some German people to go and have a place to mourn him or anything like that. So that's why the Soviets wanted to get rid of him. I had heard that he's buried underneath some like indiscriminate garage somewhere in Berlin. I don't know. I'm not for sure what happened to him. All right, so the Germans then were forced to surrender. Um, there was some debate. Some of the Germans are like, well, we don't want to, we don't want unconditional surrender. We want some stipulations to it. And Eisenhower said, no, you're just going to surrender. It doesn't matter what you want. And so he put that in place. He said, we're just going to stay here and then just let the Soviets then take you over. So he demanded an unconditional surrender. And so I'd always heard that it was Keitel, but again, upon doing some research, I guess that it was General Alfred Jodl who signed the unconditional surrender at Reims, France, right? And the war was over. This was May 7th, 1948, and we're going to get victory over Europe on May 8th. So this is VE Day, May 8th, 1945, and you have here Winston Churchill with the King of England, and standing, I believe, to the far right, next to the Queen Mother, I believe that is Queen Elizabeth, who is the Queen today. I think that she was crowned Queen in like 1954. So she's been a monarch for a very long time. But anyway, there's a movie that was done about this. The king had a really bad stuttering problem, apparently. And so he had to get some speech therapy before this because he was very nervous about going out and speaking before all of these people. And so he had to work his way up towards that. And then there's Winston Churchill, who was highly regarded and loved by most of the British people. All right, some other things. So part of it, we're going to get some advances in technology, and part of that comes from breaking codes. So the British, the Germans, and the Japanese, the Americans all had ways of trying to break the enemy's code. So for the British and the Americans, the code breaking took place at a place called, it was an estate, right, a country estate called Bletchley Park. And here it was very top secret. This is where they got information from the Japanese and from the British, and they tried to decipher or break their code. The Japanese had this machine on the left. It's known as Purple, and that was given the name by the Allies. I'm not quite sure why. But anyway, there was encryption. It was an encryption machine that was used to try to break their code, or it was try to break our code, I should say, there. The Germans had what was known as the Enigma. So this is kind of the precursor to computers. All right, so ending the war in the Pacific, once it was over in Europe, we could turn our attention to the war in the Pacific, and we did, and we continued the island hopping, and it got worse before it got better. One of the things that our guys had to start watching for were kamikaze pilots, these suicide bombers who were asked to basically take their planes and fly it into ships, take these ships out, kill as many people as possible, and they did it. right? So not only do you have to look for the submarines and torpedoes, our guys out on the ships are also looking for planes coming in because the planes could crash into the ships. All right, but we continue to push them back, and in 1944, General Douglas MacArthur is able to return to the Philippines. He had been in command of the Philippines, and he was the Supreme Allied Commander of the Pacific. So I think in this war, I talked about Patton, I talked about Eisenhower, and then MacArthur. All three of them went to West Point. MacArthur was at the top of his class, right? But anyway, he takes the Philippines back, and then they start pushing forward to push the Japanese back. All right, so this was a very famous incident that occurred. This is on Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima, one of the islands that they had to take. They had been fighting there for a long time, and they would continue to fight for several months after this picture was taken. The Marines raised this flag up on the top of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, that island. Somebody took this photograph and it became very famous. There's a huge statue. I mean, it's about double life size. Near Arlington National Cemetery is the Marine Corps War Memorial that is there. And if you ever get the chance to go see it, you should. It's pretty cool. These guys, if you read the book Flags of My Fathers, it talks about these men, what they had endured and the fighting that took place there, and then what they would endure as they had to go on this tour around the country trying to sell war bonds. They really didn't like that sort of attention that was given to them. Here is another conference by the Big Three. They met at Potsdam in August of 1945. Notice that Winston Churchill is not there, and neither is FDR. FDR had died of, it's believed, a brain aneurysm at Warm Springs, Georgia, which was kind of like his retreat. He was there with his mistress and a couple of his cousins and his dogs. He leaned over. He was having his portrait done. He had complained of a headache, and he just kind of keeled over, and he had died. So then Harry Truman, vice president, becomes president. Clement Attlee became the prime minister of England when Winston Churchill, when his party lost the majority in parliament. Churchill would come back. Attlee's not going to be there for very long, so Churchill's party will win the majority again. At this point, Truman knows that we have the atomic bomb because it had been successfully detonated on July 16, 1945. Stalin also knows about it because of his intelligence service and the spying that had taken place. The Japanese might have known about it too, but because of this ability to attack the Japanese like that, Truman was adamant there needs to be an unconditional surrender of the Japanese, right? But they chose not to surrender because what that would have meant for Emperor Hirohito is he would have to have stepped down, and he wasn't about to do that. Eventually, they did make some concessions and allowed the Japanese to keep their emperor in place. So they talk about some other things too besides that. One of the things is that they decided to change or shift the border of Poland. Poor Poland, they had fought admirably in the war, and it was in Poland where the war broke out in the first place. Also, they decided that they were going to have to divide up Germany. And as you know from contemporary American history, the Soviets got Eastern Germany, Americans got the southern part, the northern part went to the British, and the western part would go to the French. And that was going to be in place basically throughout the 1980s until Germany would be united. The top secret program to develop the nuclear bomb and develop other weaponry was the Manhattan Project. This was a project that was part of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Initially, this was located in Manhattan, which is one of the boroughs of New York, and it was to continue the research of two scientists from Columbia University, Enrico Fermi and then Leo Szilard. But anyway, they were researching uranium and the potential for weapons there. So what this did is it grew and it was moved to Los Alamos, New Mexico, which was basically a small city that employed thousands of people, and everything was top secret so that they could kind of develop plutonium and they can develop this weaponry. The person who was in charge of the project overall was an Army general. It says colonel, but actually he was a general, Leslie Groves. He was to lead the project. And then Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, he was the lead scientist behind it. He was in charge of the laboratory there. Eventually, they were successful. They tested the first atomic bomb. It's known as the Trinity test. This was July 16th, 1945, in a very remote location in the desert. Okay, and this is an image of the Trinity project, the bomb that went off. All right, and this right here, at top left, this is General Leslie Groves, and then to the right and the bottom, this is Dr. Robert Oppenheimer. Once this happened, once the bomb was detonated, he said, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds," which is from an old Hindu script, I suppose, or I was told. All right, so anyway, since they have this, they detonate it in July, it's going to be used in August, right? Not very long after it was first detonated. So the Americans had gotten to the Marianas Islands, and one of the islands there is Tinian, right? So this would be the perfect launching site for the bombs. So you had two bombs here. You can see one. One is Little Boy, and the other one is Fat Man. So the first bomb, and Tinian, if you look at it, is 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. So it's still a long way to fly, right? 12 hours round trip in a B-29 bomber. If you look to the right, this is Colonel Paul Tibbets, and he is flying the Enola Gay. I think that's the name of his mother or something like that. But anyway, so the plane takes off on August 6th. A B-29. That morning at 8:15, they drop Little Boy, the blue bomb, right there over Hiroshima. And then the Japanese did not surrender. So on August 9th, they dropped Fat Man, the plutonium bomb. They dropped that over the city of Nagasaki. So if you look at Hiroshima right here, right away, about 70,000 people died. There were people who walk around, they had like the skin burnt off of them. They just burnt. Some people, a person, a former student, went to one of the memorials and they have things left over there. And apparently, these people just burnt except for their toes. So there's like piles and piles of toes in these museums. They also said that it was so hot that like the rivers boiled that were there. So right away, there's a death of at least 70,000 people, 48,000 buildings, hundreds of thousands of people get ill from other radiation sickness, poison, cancers, all sorts of things. And then this is Nagasaki. This city too is also leveled. 40,000 people were killed immediately, 60,000 injured, and hundreds of thousands ill as a result. So here's a memorial. The building on the far right, that building pretty much is what it was like right following the explosion, and they have kept it there. So this does force the Japanese to surrender. So they go to the USS Missouri, and they have right out there in front, this is Emperor Hirohito. Many of the Japanese people had never heard him speak. He gets on the radio and speaks to the Japanese people and tells them that they're going to surrender and why. So this was very humiliating for the people to go onto our ship and for an emperor who may have believed him to be the descendant of the sun god or god to come onto the ship and to surrender in such a way was very humiliating. Keep in mind, as I told you, that was against what they believed was honorable. So this is the USS Missouri, and then this is General Douglas MacArthur right here on the right, who is accepting their surrender. The person right behind him is an admiral by the name of John McCain. So you might remember that Senator John McCain was a longtime senator from Arizona. This is his grandfather. His father was also an admiral when he served in Vietnam. Okay, and here are some Japanese POWs at our military installation at Guam. And here is a huge celebration that took place on VJ Day, Victory Over Japan, in Times Square. These two people did not know each other, but this man kissed this woman, and this just became an iconic photograph of World War II ending. And the results of the war. If you look at it right here, it was devastating, especially look at the Soviet Union. Each one of those flags is supposed to represent about 100,000 deaths. So this is where some of the worst fighting of the war took place. So you can see those are Soviet soldiers. The skulls are civilians. So there's a large number of civilians as well. And then you have the swastika on those other flags. Those are where a lot of Germans died. The Star of David, those indicate the Jewish population. So if you go to Poland, which is the country right to the west of the Soviet Union, right here, they lost a large number of people as well. The German soldiers, most of their losses were over here in the Soviet Union, very few of them in France. And if you notice too, there's quite a few from disease, and many of those are in Germany. Perhaps those are people who survived the concentration camps but died afterwards as a result. So, and then you look too at all the civilian population in Germany and in Poland, and many of those people are as a result of the Holocaust, as were a lot of people in Russia. Okay, and then if you look here in Asia, look at all the loss of civilian life in China. And then if you look at these flags right here, those show the communist, right, and then the nationalists. Now remember, they were embroiled in a civil war prior to World War II, and they're going to start fighting again. The nationalists took a much bigger loss, so this might have impacted them significantly. The Japanese army, they lost quite a few out here in the Pacific, over here near where they were fighting for Burma, and then in China, right? But notice that there are no real Japanese forces in Japan. And if you look at the civilian deaths, even though they had 2 atomic bombs dropped on them, civilian deaths were low in comparison. But they also, there's a lot of people who died from diseases. Presumably that was from the atomic bomb. Okay, so if you look at the numbers at the United States, it shows here about 16 million who are men in the war. I know that I said about 9 million served. Those people might have served overseas, so maybe the other 7 million didn't serve overseas. If you look at battle deaths, 291,000, so it's close to about 300,000. Double that, and then you have the Civil War, which is the bloodiest aside from this one. Right? And then wounded, quite a few wounded as well. But compare that, the number of our injured, to that in the Soviet Union, right? Their battle deaths over 6 million, right? And they're wounded 14 million. And that's hard to even comprehend. So after the war, what's going to happen is they're going to have a shortage of men. And they make laws that basically make it really easy for men to get divorced from women, and it encourages men to have multiple partners to try to procreate the population. And then they make laws to try to make it easier for women to work and have children. They're supposed to have daycare facilities, canteens to feed your children, and things like that. So it was a problem. It was very problematic for the people of the Soviet Union for years to come, and their loss of population. Okay, so also another thing that's an outgrowth of this, if you look, there's a lot of movement throughout Europe, and you can see the division of Germany into the different sectors, the Soviet, the French, the American, and the British. You also see the borders that change somewhat. Poland's border changes. They get some of the territory that was Germany prior to the war. The Soviets come and they gain a lot of territory. Even though it doesn't show it, they're going to take Poland, Czechoslovakia, and pretty much all of Eastern Europe. And then we're going to get that Iron Curtain that's going to prevail across the world that everybody likes talking about with the Cold War. Another thing that is changing is all the Jews who are going to leave Europe, and they're going to start to flee towards, if you look right here, they are fleeing to go towards, Israel. So this is already the beginning of a Zionist movement that's taking place. Right, we're also going to get the beginning of the Cold War, right? The bipolarization of Europe, divided between the Warsaw Pact and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Division of Germany, we already discussed that. The creation of the United Nations, right? We're going to get the Nuremberg trials. Those Nazis that remained will be tried for their crimes against humanity, right? Which is a new crime. And then in Tokyo, same thing. This is Hideki Tojo. He tried to commit suicide prior to being tried. He shot himself in the chest, but we took him and we saved his life so he could be tried and then executed. Okay, so 8 of our future American presidents will also have served in World War II. The last is going to be George H.W. Bush. So the first one right here, this is Dwight Eisenhower. And then after him in 1960, we get Kennedy, who becomes president, and then Johnson, and then Nixon. So these 3 all served in the Navy. Oops. Right. I'm pretty sure that that is an Army uniform. This is Gerald Ford. Also in the Navy is Jimmy Carter. In the Army is Ronald Reagan. And then also in the Army, because we didn't have the Air Force yet, is George H.W. Bush, who, as told you, was a fighter pilot. Another thing that's going to come out of this is the space race and all this new technology as a result of World War II. We're also going to get computers. So we get the Mark I, the Colossus, and then this woman right here, she was an admiral, Grace Hooper. She developed the COBOL language that was used in computers. And then we're going to get this movement by many nations throughout the world to decolonize. They want their independence. So there's all these emerging new third world nationalist movements. So all these countries are moving to get their independence. And you can see up here, this guy, Nehru and Gandhi, they want their independence from England. This right here represents Vietnam, South Africa, or other places in Africa, Cuba, and then Palestine. And then so what we're going to see is the decolonization of Africa and Asia as European nations leave their colonies behind and turn over the rule of their empires to the people on the ground there. All right, well, thank you for listening, and I hope you do well on your quizzes. Thanks.